help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Please like the video and share your thoughts on the video. Your feedback helps make the contents better. Now let's get to the story.
The call came in at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning, and I remember the exact time because I had just pulled into the church parking lot, engine still running, hands still on the gear shift. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. It was Dave, the plumber I'd hired that morning to fix a leak in the wall of my late wife's office. I almost didn't answer. I was already 10 minutes late for the grief counseling session Pastor Elkins had been begging me to attend for 6 months. 6 whole months of Raymond, you need to talk to someone, and Raymond, bottling this up isn't healthy, and Raymond, Linda would want you to heal. And I had finally dragged myself out of the house and into the car and driven the 12 minutes to Calvary Baptist Church on Oak Mill Road, and now my phone was ringing. I picked up because something in my gut told me to. Mr. Carter. Dave's voice was low, careful, like he was choosing each word with both hands. I need you to come back home right now. I frowned. Dave, I'm literally just about to walk into. Sir. He stopped me. I found something. Behind the wall, under the pipe. Something your wife left. He paused. But I need you to come alone. Please don't bring anyone with you. The way he said it, that's what got me. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet and certain, the way a man talks when he's seen something he knows will change your life. I put the car in reverse. I didn't know it then, but I was reversing away from a grief counseling session and straight into the biggest storm of my entire life. A storm my wife had been quietly preparing for. A storm with a name I knew very well. My name is Raymond Carter. I am 47 years old. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, lived there until I was 31, then moved to Charlotte, North Carolina when I married Linda. I spent the next 15 years building what I genuinely believed was a good, solid, honest life. I worked as a structural engineer for a mid-size firm downtown. Good job. Steady income. I coached Little League on weekends for 3 years, even though I have absolutely zero athletic ability and the kids knew it. Linda used to say I coached Little League the same way I danced, with tremendous enthusiasm and very poor results. She wasn't wrong. Linda herself was something else entirely. She was smart in a way that made you forget to be intimidated. She co-owned a financial consulting firm called Pinnacle Advisory Group with her business partner, a man named Victor Holloway. They'd built the firm together from scratch, starting with nothing but a shared office space, 2 laptops, and a vision that Linda could articulate better than anyone. Within 8 years, Pinnacle had over 40 employees and clients across 6 states. We had a good life. Not perfect, no life is, but good. Warm. Real. Then, 14 months ago, Linda died. The doctors called it cardiac arrest. She was 44 years old, no significant heart history, no warning signs anyone caught. She was here one evening, laughing at a show we were watching, and gone before sunrise the next morning. Just like that. 14 months ago, and there are still mornings I walk into the kitchen expecting to smell her coffee. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to touch her home office. I just closed the door. For a full year, that door stayed shut like it was a room in a museum. Her reading glasses were still folded on the desk. Her calendar still showed March of last year. Then a pipe behind the office wall burst in January, and I had no choice but to call a plumber. I hired Dave Kowalski, 61 years old, 30 years in the trade, mustache like a country singer from 1987. Good man. Quiet. Professional. The kind of man who shows up on time and doesn't talk unless he has something to say. I did not expect him to call me from that office and change everything. Thank you so much for being here and staying with me so far. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I truly love seeing how far these stories travel. And just to be clear, this story includes some fictionalized details used to help explain the situation and its meaning. Any similarity to real individuals or settings is unintentional, but the message I'm sharing is something I believe can genuinely help you. Help me show her that these stories matter. When I pulled back into the driveway, Dave was standing on the front porch waiting for me. He had his cap in his hands and his tool belt still on, which told me he hadn't gone back to work. Whatever he'd found, it had stopped him completely. "You alone?" he asked, looking past me at the car. You told me to come alone, Dave. I came alone. He nodded slowly and held the front door open for me without another word. I followed him down the hall, past the kitchen, past the framed photos on the wall. Our wedding photo, the trip to Savannah, Linda at her firm's 10-year anniversary party standing next to Victor Holloway with his big politician smile and his tailored suit. We walked into Linda's office. The wall panel to the left of the window was open. Dave had been working on the pipe inside it, and in doing so, he'd pulled back a section of drywall that wasn't actually load-bearing. It was a false panel. Behind it, there was a shallow built-in alcove, maybe 8 inches deep and about 2 feet wide. Insulated. Deliberately sealed. Inside it were 2 things. A fireproof lockbox, gray about the size of a shoebox. And taped to the inside of the false panel, a sealed envelope with 2 words written on it in Linda's handwriting. For Raymond. I stood there for probably 30 seconds without moving. Then Dave cleared his throat gently and said, "I'll be outside, Mr. Carter. Take all the time you need." He left. I heard the front door close behind him. I sat down in Linda's chair, the same burgundy leather chair I hadn't sat in since she died, and I picked up the envelope first. My hands weren't steady. I want to be honest about that. I'm a 47-year-old structural engineer who has stood on the frameworks of buildings 20 stories up, and my hands were shaking opening an envelope. Her handwriting inside was careful and deliberate, like she'd written slowly on purpose. "Raymond, if you're reading this, then either I'm gone or I finally ran out of courage to tell you to your face. I'm sorry for either one. There's something happening at Pinnacle that I can't ignore anymore. Victor has been stealing from the firm. Not small amounts, I'm talking years of systematic fraud. Client funds redirected, accounts manipulated, numbers that only look right if you don't look too hard. I've been quietly gathering proof for 8 months because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything or went to anyone. I've gone to a lawyer. His name is Daniel Reyes and his card is in the lockbox. He has copies of everything. If something happens to me, and I pray to God nothing does, call him first. Tell him you found the alcove. He'll know what to do. I love you more than I've ever been able to say out loud. I'm sorry I carried this alone. I was trying to protect you until I had enough to end it the right way. Please don't let him walk away from this. Linda." I read it twice. Then I set it down on the desk very carefully, like it was made of something fragile, and I just sat there in her chair looking at her reading glasses folded on the desk in front of me. The grief counseling session I'd skipped felt very far away. Here's what I knew about Victor Holloway before that afternoon. He was 52 years old. He'd grown up in Raleigh, gone to Duke on a partial scholarship, built himself into a respected financial consultant through what everyone around him agreed was a combination of sharp instincts and relentless networking. He had a beautiful wife named Patricia, 2 kids in college, a house in the Myers Park neighborhood that cost more than I'll make in the next 15 years combined, and a reputation in Charlotte's business community that he had polished like silverware for decades. He'd given a speech at Linda's memorial service. Stood at that podium with tears in his eyes, real ones or what looked like real ones, and talked about how Linda was the soul of Pinnacle, how the firm would never be the same, how she was the most honest person he'd ever known. I had shaken his hand that day and thanked him for his words. Now I was sitting in her office holding her letter and thinking about his hand in mine, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 14 months. Something that burned quietly and very, very clearly. I unlocked the lockbox with the small key taped to the back of the envelope. Inside was an organized set of documents that Linda had clearly assembled with extreme care. Bank records. Internal transfer logs. Client account statements with handwritten annotations in her neat, precise script. Screenshots printed out and dated. A USB drive labeled Pinnacle_audit_evidence in red marker. And a business card for a man named Daniel Reyes, attorney at law, with a Charlotte address and a cell number written on the back with the words "Call Mobile," urgent underlined twice. There was also one more thing in that box that I did not expect. A thin folder labeled medical. Inside it was a printed article from a medical journal, the kind of dense, technical document Linda would have been able to read and understand far better than me. She'd underlined certain sections and written notes in the margins. The article was about a compound called thallium, a heavy metal. A poison. historically used in rat poison before it was banned. Colorless, tasteless. Causes symptoms that, in small doses over time, can look a lot like cardiac deterioration. Next to the article in Linda's handwriting, started feeling symptoms October. Victor gave me tea every morning in the office. October through March. Never thought anything of it. Now I don't know. Below that, one final line. Get my hair tested. Please. I had to put the folder down. I stood up from her chair, walked to the window, and stood there looking at the backyard, the garden she'd planted, the bird feeder she'd hung from the oak tree, and I breathed. Slowly. In and out. Like a man standing at the edge of something very high. She'd suspected she was being poisoned. She'd suspected it, documented it, hidden the evidence, and written me a letter, and she had died before she could finish what she'd started. Victor Holloway had sat at her memorial service and cried. I picked up my phone and called Daniel Reyes. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting. Mr. Carter, he said before I even said my name. I've been hoping you'd call. Linda told me you would eventually. If you want to talk about the moment when the ground shifts under your feet and nothing feels solid anymore, that was mine. My wife, a year before I found that box, had sat in a lawyer's office and told him that one day her husband would call. And she'd been right. Daniel Reyes was a financial fraud attorney with 20 years of experience. He was also, as he explained to me in our first phone call, already in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Linda had not just hired him as a precaution. She had set an entire process in motion. She asked me to wait until you contacted me before taking the next steps, Daniel said. She wanted you to know first. She wanted you to be part of it. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 2 hours on that phone call. Dave Kowalski, bless his heart, quietly finished his work, let himself out the back, and left an invoice on the kitchen counter with a handwritten note that said no charge for today, Mr. Carter. I'm sorry for your loss. I didn't even know he'd gone. Here's what Daniel laid out for me on that call, piece by piece. Victor Holloway had been siphoning money from Pinnacle Advisory Group for at least 6 years. He did it carefully, small amounts from multiple client accounts, routed through a shell company he'd created in Delaware under a name that had no obvious connection to him. The total, based on Linda's documentation and the forensic accountant Daniel had brought in, was somewhere between $4 and $6 million. Linda had noticed the first discrepancies about 8 months before she died. She'd said nothing to Victor. She'd gone quiet, done her own digging, and then come to Daniel. 3 months before she died, she'd added a section to her evidence file about her health. About the tea. The FBI had been wanting to move on Victor for 2 months, Daniel told me. They were waiting for the full evidence package, the original documents from Linda's lockbox, which they now had a copy of, but wanted the originals for court. And there was one more thing. Victor, it turned out, had been quietly working to acquire Linda's share of Pinnacle since her death. Her stake in the firm had passed through her estate, and Victor had been in conversations with her estate's administrator, a distant cousin of Linda's who had no idea what Pinnacle was actually worth or what was actually going on inside it, about buying out that share at a significantly undervalued price. He was trying to own the whole thing, cover his tracks, bury the one person who'd known the truth, and profit from it. The audacity. The absolute, breathtaking audacity of this man. I've always been pretty mild-mannered. I coach Little League badly and I cry at certain commercials, and I once apologized to a gas station attendant for not having exact change. But sitting in that truck with the phone to my ear, listening to Daniel Reyes explain all of this in his calm, professional attorney voice, I understood, in a very new and very focused way, what it means to want justice so badly you can feel it in your teeth. Before we go further, if this story is hitting close to home, if you know what it's like to find out that someone you trusted was living a lie right in front of you, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories take everything to put together, and knowing you're here makes it worth it. Now let's keep going. Here's the thing about revenge, real revenge, the kind that actually means something. It's not about screaming or throwing punches or showing up at someone's door at 2 in the morning. That's not revenge. That's just anger wearing a costume. Real revenge is watching someone lose everything they built while standing on your foundation. Real revenge is patient. Real revenge is documented. Linda had taught me that without ever knowing she was teaching it to me. Over the next 6 weeks, I became a man with a purpose. Not the scattered, drifting man who'd been shutting doors and skipping grief counseling sessions. A focused man. A man with a folder. Daniel Reyes guided me through every step. I delivered Linda's original documents to him. I submitted Linda's hair for posthumous testing at a certified toxicology lab. Daniel's forensic contacts made that possible. I sat down with 2 FBI agents, a woman named Special Agent Torres and her partner, Special Agent Bright, in a conference room in downtown Charlotte, and I answered every question they had for 4 hours. Calmly. Clearly. The toxicology results came back 3 weeks later. Thallium. Present in Linda's hair at levels consistent with prolonged low-dose exposure. Not enough alone to be called definitive cause of death, but enough to cause cardiac stress over time in someone with no prior heart issues. Enough to matter. Enough for the FBI's case to shift from financial fraud into something far more serious. Victor Holloway didn't know any of this was happening. Because here's the beautiful, precisely engineered thing about the way Linda had set this up. She'd built the case so carefully that it didn't require Victor to make a mistake. It didn't require him to get nervous or slip up or confess. It just required the right people to look at what she'd already found. He kept showing up to his office every morning in his tailored suits. He kept taking client meetings and giving interviews to business journals and attending charity fundraisers with Patricia in her pearls. He even called me once in early March to ask how I was doing and whether I'd thought any further about Linda's estate share. Phrased so casually, so warmly, as if he was doing me a favor by asking. I'm still thinking it through, Victor, I told him. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need, Raymond. You know I'm here for you. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat there for a second. Then I texted Daniel Reyes. He called again about the share. Daniel texted back, good. We'll add it to the pattern. Even his phone calls were going in the file. The morning Victor Holloway was arrested, I was at home. I know, you'd think I would have been there. You'd think I'd have wanted to be standing somewhere nearby to watch it happen, like some scene from a movie where the wronged man watches justice rolls in from a hill overlooking the city. But that's not how I wanted it. I didn't need to see his face when the cuffs went on. What I actually needed, was to know it happened. And it did. Agent Torres called me at 7:52 in the morning. Mr. Carter. I wanted to call you personally. Victor Holloway was taken into federal custody this morning at his residence. He's being charged with wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and, pending further toxicology review, 1 count of criminal administration of a toxic substance. There may be additional charges as the investigation develops. She paused. Your wife put this together, Mr. Carter? I want you to know that. We've seen a lot of fraud cases. I have never seen a private citizen document something with that level of precision and care. She knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't say anything for a moment. She always did, I finally said. Now let me tell you about Patricia Holloway because this is the part that surprised even me, and I do not say that lightly after everything I'd already been through. Patricia had come to Linda's memorial service too. She'd hugged me, told me Linda was a queen, and pressed a casserole dish into my hands that she'd made herself, baked ziti, which I ate every day for 4 days because I didn't have the energy to cook anything. She'd seemed like a decent woman standing next to a terrible man, and I'd filed her away in my mind under innocent bystander. Turns out, Patricia had suspected Victor for years. Not the fraud specifically, but something. She'd noticed the money that didn't add up, the trips he took that didn't match his explanations, the late nights and the locked laptop and the way he'd started avoiding conversations about Pinnacle whenever she asked. She hadn't known what it was, but she'd known something was wrong. When Victor was arrested, Patricia didn't stand by him. She filed for divorce 4 days later. She also called Daniel Reyes, not for herself, but to offer any financial records from their household that might be useful to the prosecution. She handed over 6 years of bank statements, investment accounts, and tax returns without anyone having to ask. She also called me. It was a short call. She said, Raymond, I am so sorry. For Linda. For everything. She said it simply, no performance in it. Then she said, I made his lunch every day for 20 years and I never once thought to check what was in his briefcase. I should have. I told her she had nothing to apologize to me for. She said, I know. But I needed to say it anyway. People are complicated. I've been thinking about that more lately. Here's the twist I didn't see coming, and trust me, after everything I'd already learned, I thought I was done being surprised. During the federal investigation, the forensic accountants went through every layer of Victor's financial structure. And in doing so, they found something that had nothing to do with Victor at all. In the Pinnacle client files, there was a set of accounts that Linda had flagged, not for fraud but for something else. A pattern she'd noticed in the data but hadn't fully explained in her notes, probably because she'd run out of time. These accounts belonged to a man named Gerald Sims. Gerald was one of Pinnacle's oldest clients, had been with the firm since nearly the beginning. Quiet, older gentleman, retired. Linda had been managing his retirement portfolio personally. What Linda had noticed, and what the forensic accountant confirmed, was that someone had been quietly moving money into Gerald Sims' account from the shell company Victor had created. Small, irregular amounts. Amounts that looked, if you examine them from a certain angle, like payoffs. Gerald Sims, it turned out, was the administrator of a regulatory board that had oversight over financial consulting firms in North Carolina. The same board that had twice reviewed Pinnacle for compliance. The same board that had, both times, cleared them without issue despite red flags that should have triggered a deeper audit. Victor hadn't just been stealing. He'd been paying someone to make sure no one looked too closely. And Gerald Sims had been cashing those checks every quarter and going home to his quiet retirement like nothing at all was happening. Both of them were charged. Victor for everything Linda had documented plus the bribery charges. Gerald for his role in the cover-up. Two men taken down by a woman who'd been dead for over a year. A woman who had sat alone in this office with the door closed and done the work because she believed it was right and because she just knew, that the truth would eventually find the hands she'd left it for. If you've made it this far in this story and you feel something, if your chest is tight or your jaw is set, I want you to know that's exactly how I felt writing this. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now. Not for me. For the people in your life who fought alone so the people they loved wouldn't have to. This is how we honor them. Subscribe and stay. The legal proceedings took the better part of 14 months from Victor's arrest. I won't walk you through all of it, partly because it's exhausting and partly because federal financial fraud cases involve a level of paperwork that would make anyone want to go back to simpler times like the Middle Ages. But I'll tell you the outcome. Victor Holloway was convicted on all counts. The fraud charges alone carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. With the toxicology evidence, the thallium, the tea, the documented pattern, the criminal administration charge added another layer that the prosecution did not understate. The judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Ann Simmons who had apparently zero patience for well-dressed men who believed their tailored suits made them above consequence, sentenced Victor to 23 years in federal prison. He would be 75 years old if he served the full term. His assets were frozen pending civil claims from the defrauded clients. His Myers Park house sold. His investment accounts seized. His reputation, carefully polished for 30 years, gone. Not damaged, gone. Gerald Sims received 8 years for his role. And Pinnacle Advisory Group? Here's where it gets good. Here's where I actually felt Linda in the room. Because of the way Linda's estate was structured, and because of the extraordinary circumstances of how her share of the firm had been preserved through the legal process, her stake in Pinnacle did not get dissolved or sold off to Victor or absorbed into the chaos. It passed, after a lot of legal work by Daniel Reyes, who earned every penny of his fee, to Linda's estate. Which meant it passed to me. I was suddenly the co-owner of a financial consulting firm. I am a structural engineer who coaches Little League badly. I want to be very clear, I did not feel equipped for this. At all. But here's what I did. I worked with Daniel, worked with the firm's remaining senior staff, good people who had no idea what Victor had been doing and who were shaken and embarrassed and desperate for something to hold on to, and we brought in a new managing partner. A woman named Diane Okafor who had spent 20 years at a competing firm and had a reputation that was essentially the opposite of Victor's in every way that mattered. Diane came in like someone opening all the windows in a house that's been shut up too long. She restructured, she audited, she made calls to every client who had been defrauded and set up restitution plans that went further than the court required. She turned Pinnacle into something. More importantly, she turned it into something Linda would have recognized. Within 18 months of Diane joining, Pinnacle's client base had rebuilt. The firm's name, dragged through the headlines for over a year, was being spoken about differently. Not without scars. Some clients never came back, and I don't blame them, but differently. Honestly. I stayed involved in an advisory capacity, which mostly meant monthly meetings where I asked questions that I'm sure sometimes made Diane want to smile patiently at me in the way you smile at someone who means well but doesn't fully understand what they're looking at. She never made me feel that way though. She was extraordinarily kind about it. One afternoon after a board meeting she said to me, "Raymond, your wife built something real here. I just want you to know that I see it in the bones of this place. It's worth saving." I didn't trust my voice to answer that one. I want to tell you about one last moment. Because this is the one that settled something in me that I hadn't been able to settle on my own, no matter how much justice had been served. It was a Tuesday evening in October, almost exactly 2 years after Linda died. I was in her office, which had been her office and was now just the office, with the wall properly repaired and the alcove sealed, though I'd left the built-in shelf behind it intact because somehow knowing it was there felt important to me. I was going through some of the last boxes of her professional files that I'd been slowly, carefully sorting through. And at the bottom of one of them, tucked inside a manila folder that had no label, I found a photograph I had never seen before. It was Linda at her desk, this office. It must have been taken by someone she'd asked to take it, or maybe a self-timer, because she was alone in the frame. She was sitting back in the burgundy leather chair with a small, private smile on her face and a stack of papers in her lap. She looked calm, determined, not stressed, not afraid, just focused the way she always looked when she knew exactly what she was doing. I turned the photo over. On the back, in her handwriting, November 14th. I think I have enough now. I think this is finally going to be okay. November 14th. 4 months before she died. She had believed, sitting right there in that chair, that she was going to make it. That she was going to finish what she'd started, hand it over, and come home to me and her coffee and her bird feeder in the backyard. She hadn't made it. But she'd left everything in a way that made sure the ending she'd been working towards still happened. She'd made sure of it. I sat in that chair for a long time that evening with the photo in my hand. I cried in a way I hadn't let myself since the funeral, not the silent, controlled kind, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep and won't be managed. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I think some things deserve that kind of crying. When it passed, I set the photo up against her reading glasses on the desk, where I could see it. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work. Victor Holloway is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Cumberland, Maryland. He is no longer mentioned in Charlotte's business community. When his name does come up, it comes up the way all disgraced men's names eventually come up, quietly, briefly, and with a kind of exhausted disgust that has no energy left for anger. His house on Myers Park is owned by a family with 3 children and a golden retriever. I drove past it once by accident, taking a different route home. The kids had left bikes on the front lawn. It looked like what a home is supposed to look like. Patricia Holloway moved to Asheville. I heard from someone that she volunteers at a literacy program there on weekends. I hope that's true. Daniel Reyes sent me a bottle of 12-year-old bourbon the week after the verdict, with a card that said simply, she would be proud. I've never been much of a bourbon drinker, but I poured 1 glass, sat on the back porch, and toasted the bird feeder in the oak tree. Dave Kowalski, the plumber, I hired him again the following spring to fix a couple other things around the house. He asked me how things had turned out, and I told him. He listened with his arms crossed and his mustache doing that thing mustaches do when someone is trying not to react too much to something remarkable. When I finished, he said, "Smart woman." "The smartest," I said. He nodded, picked up his tools, and went back to work. I coach Little League again now. New group of kids this spring, 8 and 9-year-olds who have the same level of confidence in my abilities as my previous teams did, which is to say very little. One kid, a 9-year-old named Marcus, Actually, different name, let me call him Tommy, told me last practice that my pitching demonstration looked like I was trying to throw and sneeze at the same time. I told him that was fair and moved on. Linda would have loved that. There are days when the grief still hits like something physical. When I walk into the kitchen in the morning and the absence of her coffee smell is so specific that it's almost loud. Those days are real and they don't disappear, and I've stopped expecting them to. The grief counselor I finally started seeing, yes, I eventually made it to that session about 3 months after the phone call that interrupted the first attempt, told me that grief doesn't go away, it just changes shape. It gets less sharp. More like weight than wound. I think that's about right. But here's what I also carry now on those days alongside the grief. I carry the knowledge that my wife looked at something corrupt and wrong and dangerous, and instead of walking away or staying silent or protecting herself the easy way, she chose to do the painstaking, careful, dangerous work of making sure it couldn't win. She chose that even when she was afraid. Even when she suspected what might be happening to her health. Even when she had no guarantee that any of it would work. She did it because she believed it was right. And then she trusted me to find it. I think about that a lot. About being trusted by someone who knew you that well. About how carrying someone's trust, even after they're gone, maybe especially after they're gone, is one of the most serious and most human things there is. I didn't know that November morning when I pulled into Calvary Baptist's parking lot, that I was about to drive back home and find my wife's voice waiting for me behind a wall. But she knew I'd get there eventually. She always did. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, made you think about the people in your life who've carried things quietly and trusted you with what they left behind, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. These stories find their way to the strangest, most beautiful corners of the world, and every single one of you who shows up here is part of why that keeps happening. Linda's bird feeder is full. The oak tree is still standing. And the door to her office is open now. That's how I know she's at peace.